Good evening. I'm Tom Cadigan, Associate Director of Alumni Relations, and I'd like to welcome you to today's Holy Cross Alumni Webinar event. This is the latest in our continuing series of web-based presentations that feature Holy Cross faculty and staff members discussing their areas of expertise and research. And tonight's topic hits home for many of you, college admissions. Is your son or daughter starting to think about college applications? What do institutions look for in prospective students? Hopefully, tonight we can start to demystify some of those questions. And we're thrilled to have Drew Carter, Senior Associate Director of Admissions, joining us for a discussion entitled Navigating the College Admissions Process. Drew is a valued member of the Holy Cross Admissions team. He has been through numerous application and decision cycles, and we're so happy to have him join us today. And we'll be together for just about an hour. Drew will start with some prepared remarks, and then we'll take questions from you, our participants, for as long as time allows. I encourage you to submit questions throughout this presentation by checking out the question function located on your webinar toolbar to the right. Again, thanks for joining us, and now it's my pleasure to turn things over to Drew Carter.
Good evening, friends. Drew Carter here. This is an exciting time to be talking about the college admissions process. We've just completed our process in the admissions office, and so often we find ourselves on the admissions committee when talking about applicants thinking and sort of saying to each other, oh, you know, if this applicant had only done blank, or if this applicant had only done X or Y. But so often we only get to share those comments amongst each other. So it's nice to have an opportunity to talk about the process from the beginning and to share some of those insights and what really could end up being valuable insights to parents who will hopefully share them with their children as they begin the college process, the application and search process. So, you know, so often we get asked, you know, questions about sort of what the best way to think about, you know, how students should start the process. But you know, one of the things I try to focus on for families is to not just think about how to start the process, but how they should also, you know, rather than thinking about how to begin, instead to think about how they want to end the process. There's this sort of great educational philosophy called understanding by design, and really it, you know, harkens to the idea that you begin by thinking about the end, and that the best decisions drive backward from the learning stop. And you know, one good way to think about this is if you are a classroom teacher, rather than thinking about what you want your students to know on the first day of class, rather than think about what you want to teach on the first day of class, think about what you want your students to know on the last day of class. And you know, I love to take that idea, that philosophy, and transfer it to the college admissions process. So rather than thinking about how you want your sons or daughters to start the search and application process, or how they should start, think about really the end. And the end, for this practical purposes, you know, if you had a current high school junior, for example, the end would be August 28th, 2018. And that's just an example, but that would be college move-in day. There's a picture of move-in day at Holy Cross. And if your, you know, sons or daughters are sophomores or younger grades, you could change the date there. But to think about move-in day, but not to necessarily think about where they would be moving in, because that really is of less importance than who you would be moving in. To think about the values and the qualities and the traits you would want your son and daughter to have when they finish this process, when they move into their dorm room as a college freshman. Think about the qualities you would want them to have so that they could be successful starting their adult life as a college student. And not just to think about those qualities, but literally to go through an exercise and enumerate those qualities, to list them out, to make a list for yourself. I think the list should be relatively short, you know, 3 or 4 or 5 qualities that you want them to have. And this is a valuable exercise for this reason. the college search and application process is filled with incredible opportunities for parents to foster really wonderful qualities and traits and skills in their sons and daughters. There are so many of these opportunities, but if parents don't take the time to identify what those qualities are, they will often miss those opportunities. So, rather than thinking about how to start the process, I always recommend to parents, think about who you want your sons and daughters to be at the end, make a list of those qualities, and when you do, all of these wonderful opportunities will appear to you throughout the search and application process. I did this exercise for my son, who's my oldest, and I came up with this 4 qualities. I want, by the time he moves into his dorm room, I want him to have a really clear understanding of the value of hard work. I want him to have a really great appreciation for giving thanks, how to give thanks and who to give it to. I hope they'll have a very clear recognition of the value of money. And then finally, I decided that I wanted him to have a really well-developed sense of voice. And, identifying those 4 qualities that I wanted my son to develop will really help us as a family identify opportunities to foster those qualities. And, I think it's important for every family to do this exercise and to come up with that list, and feel free to steal any of mine. Now, my son is only 3, and so this list hangs above his crib, so he's got plenty of time to work on these qualities. That's him on the left with his younger daughter. So let's move on with the real part of our conversation. That's going to be to talk about applying to college. We get asked so many questions in our job, and so many of those questions tend to rotate and revolve around one central question. And that one central question is, how do colleges decide who gets in? So many of these questions that we do get asked rotate and revolve around that. How important are clubs and activities, and how important legacy, and should my son or daughter pursue multiple activities or just a singular activity? Nobody ever really asks, how do colleges decide who gets in? And that's the sort of the question that everybody's questions are nipping at. The reality is that there's about 3,000 four-year institutions in the United States. And in spite of all of the variety amongst these schools, every year, everybody in admissions who works at all of these schools weighs the same exact factors when they make their decisions. Sure, there are less selective schools and more selective schools. There are institutional priorities that change from year to year. State schools have more regulated standards based on state laws, and private schools have more flexibility. But that doesn't change the fact that all of us who work in admissions, that all of these four-year institutions in the U.S. weigh the same factors each year when we make our decisions on applications. And the reality is that in spite of all of the questions we get, I think everybody has a really clear idea of what some of those factors are. This is just a quick little sample of what some of those factors are, what state a student is applying from, what high school they attend, race and ethnicity, gender, the strength of the curriculum on the transcript, grades, rank, or if the high school doesn't rank, some sort of grade distribution profile, teacher recommendation, counselor recommendation, an additional recommendation, because everybody seems to send in an additional recommendation, athletics, service, theater arts, drama, music, standardized testing, the role of legacy, whether the student's a first generation college student, demonstrated interest, employment and internships, special skills, and then finally the essay or the student submitted portion of the application. Regardless of what school a high school student might be applying to, these factors are going to be a part of the decision at every school to which they apply. What we're seeing right now from students applying to college are rising levels of anxiety. Each year we think that the levels of anxiety can't possibly get worse. The truth is they don't get better. And in spite of what we see, I actually think it's possible for students to enjoy the college search and application process. Now, the problem with that statement is anytime you call something a process, you're not going to inspire entertainment value in a 16 or 17-year-old. But if we really just renamed it and called it a period of time, because that's what it really is. This is a period of time that begins most often and winter of the high school students' 11th grade and ends by May 1st of the students' 12th grade. May 1st is the national deposit deadline. So if we just called it what it really was, not a process, but a period of time, I think that it's important for students to have goals over that period of time as it relates to the college search and application period of time. And if I were to identify those two goals for the student, I would say this. The first one I've already named. I think students should enjoy the college search and application period of time. Their second goal should be to increase the chances at acceptance to each school to which they apply. Now, those are lofty goals, but they're the best kind of lofty goals. They are reasonably achieved. How do students go about accomplishing those goals? Well, I think they need a to-do list. A very few steps to follow in order to accomplish those lofty goals. And the first thing they need to do is identify the factors that every school will look at when they make the decision on their application. That's the tile I showed a few minutes ago. That's the listing of those factors that every school will look at. 20 to 25 factors that any high school student or parent or guidance counselor could make themselves. The factors are the same at each school to which they'll apply. The second thing they need to do is they need to let go of the factors that they don't control. That's a difficult challenge for any of us with regards to anything, letting go of factors that we don't control. The best way to accomplish that really is to do the third and final thing, and that's to focus. To focus on the three factors that the student does control. And if the student focuses on the factors that they control, I guarantee you they will accomplish those goals. They will enjoy the college search and application period of time, and without even realizing it, they're going to increase their chances at acceptance. So if we went back and revisited that list that we had before of all the factors weighed, each of those factors holds one place on that list, but that does not mean all the factors hold the same weight in the decision. The information that will come from the student's transcript, what high school they attend, what courses they signed up for, and how they've performed within those courses, that information will dominate their application for admission when they apply to college. That information drives the process, and depending upon the college, you can include standardized testing in that formula. So that's the high school they attend, the courses they've signed up for, how they performed within those courses, and then the standardized test scores. But what high school students need to understand about their transcript, particularly when they're in this college search process, is that for the most part, they don't control their transcripts. Well, they don't control most of their transcripts. When college admissions officers look at a high school student's transcript, on average, they're going to look at 3¼ years. Freshman year, sophomore year, junior year, senior fall. Now, some schools only look at 3 years, and some colleges will look at maybe 3½ years. So I split the difference, and I'm going to say 3¼ years. Freshman year, sophomore year, junior year, and senior fall. Now, depending upon where your son or daughter might be in their high school career, freshman year is likely done, sophomore year is likely done, and for some students at this point, the fall of their junior year is already done. So most of the transcript that they will present to college is behind them. And what is so important for them is to focus on the road ahead, not the grades behind them. Now, colleges are certainly going to closely examine 9th grade, 10th grade, and the fall of 11th grade if you have a current junior. But the reality is that students should be focused on the effort and energy that they put into the classroom until the end of their senior fall. The road ahead is a really important road for them academically in the image that they will present to colleges. Because when colleges are looking at a high school student's application as it fits into a pool, what you really have to imagine is the pool of applications being egg-shaped. Now, this is a common metaphor that a lot of colleges use to describe their applicant pool as it's developed, particularly over the last 10 years. It is very easy to see a pool of applications, as true at Holy Cross, being egg-shaped. There's a very small group at the top of that pool, and that group is quickly admitted. They're qualified, if not overqualified, for that college. The group at the bottom tend to be quickly denied because they're not a good academic match. And what most colleges are finding is they have a great big mass of applications in the middle of their pool. About 85 to 90% of their applications can often be found in the middle of the pool. And what these applications have in common is that upon first inspection, the admissions officer really doesn't have a sense of which way that file is going to go, really doesn't have a sense of what the eventual decision on that application will be. Their first instinct is to say, I don't know. And so what that admissions office has to do is revisit that file and define something that will cause them to just sort of lean in a direction with their decision, because it's not a shove. If it were a shove, it would have been at the top or the very bottom. It's going to be a lean. And typically what colleges will do is they will lean in the direction of what they see at the end of the transcript. And they do that because they know that's the student they'll inherit. Everyone knows that the student that we inherit on our college campus as a freshman is going to most closely resemble the student that we see at the end of their transcript. It's not just college admissions professionals who know that. That's common sense. So what students really need to focus on is the lingering aftertaste to their transcript, the powerful aftertaste to their transcript, the student that they present at the end of their transcript. Now, Drew Carter from Holy Cross didn't say freshman year and sophomore year don't count. Drew Carter says the entire transcript counts, but what matters to the student, what they should be focused on, is the effort and energy that they put into the classroom until the end of their senior fall, the road ahead. Successes and disappointments behind them should stay behind them, and students should focus on what they control. It's really going to help them accomplish the goals of enjoying the search and application period of time and increasing their chances at acceptance. It is the first of really only 3 things they control. The second factor that students have absolute control over is how they present themselves in their essay. And if students spend too much time with their nose in the guidebooks or in Naviance, if your sons or daughters attend high schools that use Naviance, they start to spend too much time focusing on these scattergrams. These are the scattergrams that Naviance employs, and this is a mock-up of one at Harvard. But if you spend too much time staring at these scattergrams, you start to think that the admissions process is just about numbers, that your son or daughter has an X and Y axis value, their GPA and their SAT score, and you start to believe that because that's what the scattergram says. And many people will start to believe that this is where decisions come from, that in fact maybe this is what colleges do, that they map their applicants on a graph like this and let the graph determine decisions. It's easy to come to that assumption because that's certainly what Naviance suggests. And I do want to say that the transcript is the most important part of the application, for sure. But it's not the entire package. It's not all that is presented to the admissions committee. The transcript's a big part of the student, but it's not all. In a lot of ways, I see the transcript as being a little like the student's skeleton. It's a big part of who a person is, but it's certainly not everything. And here's an example of 2 different skeletons. They're different people, but they sure do look alike to me. Now put 2 transcripts next to each other from 2 totally different high schools. What's the difference between an 87 at one school and a B at another school? I don't know. It can be a little confusing. What's the difference between sophomore English at one school and English 10 at another school? Still confusing. What's the difference between advanced level courses at one school and accelerated courses at a different school? It can really be confusing. The same with skeletons, same with transcripts. They're different, but they sure do look alike. Now, what if we took, 20 skeletons and laid them next to each other, or 20 transcripts? Would adding volume bring greater clarity or greater confusion? What about if we took 200 skeletons or 200 transcripts? Is that starting to make the picture clearer? What about 2,000? 20,000? I have a friend who works in the admissions office at UCLA, not to scare you, but what about 102,000? UCLA received 102,000 applications this year. I'm certainly highlighting one far end of the spectrum here, but this is a reality, and this is a very popular school. 102,000 transcripts they received for first-year admission this year. 102,000. If you'd like a visual of what that is, imagine taking each of those transcripts and putting them in a row, making a line with each of those transcripts. End to end, each of those transcripts, if you laid them out and you started at Holy Cross, you would end in downtown Framingham. A 20-mile line of transcripts. just for first-year admission. Now, I'm certainly highlighting one far end of the spectrum. This is, school receives as many applications as anybody does in the U.S., but it's to prove the point. The point is that when we focus on the application as just being the transcript, these skeletons turn into a mass of letters and numbers and decimals and abbreviations and pluses and minuses. And our job in the admissions world is to take each of these skeletons and fill into the rest of the parts, to put on the flesh, the skin, and the hair, and the eye color, and the character, and the personality, and the perspective, all the things that make each of us more than just our skeletons. And how do we do that? Well, it's just as simple as reading. We just read. We look at where the student's from, their family background is, the siblings, parents. We look at their free time choices. Do they do theater, arts, drama, music, service, sports, clubs for leadership, employment, internships? We look at that teacher says about them in the classroom. We look at what the other teacher says about them in the classroom. We look at what the counselor says about them in the school. And then we get to their essay. And that's the part in this painting where the paintbrush is in the student's hand. And students spend a lot of time thinking about what they think we in the admissions world wants them to write about. I'll save students that time, and I will tell them that no one in the admissions world at any college cares one bit what they write their essay about. We read great essays every year on silly, stupid topics. We read horrible essays on what some would consider to be a great topic. We read great essays every year about grandma, and we read bad essays every year about grandma. It's not grandma's fault. Students will write the best essay on the topic they've selected, not the topic that the guidebook says they should write about if they want to major in English, not the topic that their older brother wrote about when they were admitted to Middlebury, and most controversially, not the topic that their mother thinks they should write about. The reality is that how they feel about their essay topic is so much more important than the topic they choose. If they choose a topic that they will find enjoyment in writing about, we will surely enjoy reading that. It's a great litmus test for any topic for students to think about. If you're bored writing it, we will absolutely be bored reading it. Students often ask me, what are you thinking when you read these essays? And the answer is very easy. Look in a mirror when you're writing it. We feel exactly the same way you do while you're writing it. If you're bored writing it, we will absolutely be bored reading it. And if you choose a topic that you can find some enjoyment in writing about, we will absolutely find joy in reading that essay. It is the best part of reading any application. We often say in the admissions world that we like reading applications, but the truth is that's a lie. We don't like reading applications. Well, maybe it's not a lie. Maybe it's just not being exact. What we mean to say is we like reading essays. It is the best part of reading any application. And if it takes 20 minutes to read an application, the first 18 minutes is busy work. It's busy work that we do just so that we can read an essay. The student's essay is the part we savor. It's what we talk about in the hallways. It's what we find joy in. It's the reason we do the first 18 minutes with the busy work. It's not the most important part of the file. That will always be the academic information that comes from the transcript. But the essay just might be the most important part of the file to the student because they have absolute control over it. And most importantly, they control the topic that they choose and they control how they feel about that topic. Students need to pick topics that they will enjoy writing about. And if they do, we will surely enjoy reading that essay. It's a great opportunity for students to develop their voice, but most importantly, it's an opportunity for students to control the factors they control. The first factor they control was their effort in the classroom to the end of the senior fall. The second factor that they control is the topic that they choose for their essay. And the third and final topic that they control that I'm going to address tonight is demonstrated interest. How students demonstrate their interest to each school to which they apply is an important part of applying to college. There's lots of ways that students can demonstrate their interest to colleges to which they apply. They can attend a campus tour, an information session. They can attend an open house at any particular college or university. They can speak with a representative at a college fair. They can attend an interview. If schools offer that opportunity, they can sign on to an online chat or any sort of written correspondence. There's lots of ways that students can demonstrate their interest. It's worth mentioning that this isn't a point system. Students don't gather more points toward acceptance each time they demonstrate their interest in some way. I do think it's important, though, for students to demonstrate their interest to each school to which they apply and to prioritize any of these opportunities. I'm a big believer that if in-person contact is possible, that they should pursue those options. That would be speaking with a representative at a college fair at our high school, attending an online or an on-campus tour or information session, or having an interview. Those in-person opportunities are really key to adding color to their application and for giving applicants an opportunity to learn about a particular college. If it's impossible to travel to that college campus, then meeting with a local representative or providing some sort of written correspondence to support the file is absolutely fine. I want to take this opportunity to speak quickly about interviews. There are two big obstacles that keep students from having interviews when they apply to college. The first obstacle is that every college or university has a different policy. Some schools provide opportunities for students to interview, and some schools don't. Some schools only do something called an informational interview. Some schools only do alumni interviews, and at some colleges, the alum is going to contact the student, and at other colleges, it's the student's responsibility to contact that alum. It can be really confusing for students trying to keep track of all of these different policies, but the reality is that admissions professionals on the other side of this decision don't have any sympathy for this obstacle. Every college that has that's going to give students the opportunity to have an interview as part of the admissions process is going to go to great lengths to communicate their policy to each applicant. In addition, every college that offers interviews is going to make their policy readily available on their website. It will take any high schooler 30 seconds to determine any particular college's policy about interviews if they spend 30 seconds on that school's website. I know it will take them 30 seconds because it took me 60 seconds when I researched about 50 colleges recently. If I can do it in 60 seconds, they can do it in 30. They are much quicker than I am on the internet. So this first obstacle, I would say it's a challenge, not an obstacle. It's a research project for students to determine the schools that they're going to apply to and what their interview policies are. So let's remove that as an obstacle. And that leaves really just one obstacle to having an interview when students apply to college. That's urban legend. That's the trick questions that students think they might be asked. That's the, these old urban legends of students being asked if they were a tree, what kind of tree they would be, or if they were a fruit or vegetable, what kind of fruit or vegetable they would be, these sort of silly questions. The reality is, in an admissions setting, in an interview, students aren't asked any question to which they don't already know the answer because the questions are about them. And not just about them. The questions are about the things they talk about every single day, about their friends and their family, their high school and their hometown, their favorite classes and their least favorite classes, their teachers and their coaches and their siblings and their parents and their hopes for college, their dreams for college, their questions about college. It is the dialogue they have every single day with their friends and family. And if they can have that dialogue in an admissions setting, it will help them get into college. These are great opportunities for students to add depth to their application. It's a great opportunity for students to develop their voice, but most importantly, it's a great opportunity for students to take control of the parts of the process that they actually control. There are no obstacles to having an interview. Students really need to determine the policies of the schools that they're applying to and pursue these opportunities when they're available. There's only 3 factors students control when they're ready to apply to college: their effort and energy in the classroom between now and the end of their senior fall, their mindset behind the essay, in particular the topic that they choose. The third factor that they control is demonstrating their interest to each school to which they apply. This is a to-do list, a very simple to-do list. All it requires is effort and energy, a little bit of encouragement from their parents, and a little bit of persistence. But if students focus on these 3 factors, I guarantee you they will enjoy the college search and application period of time. And at the same time, without even realizing it, they're going to increase their chances at acceptance. That is all any of us in education hope for them between now and May 1st of their senior year. That's the end of the first part of this presentation. I hope you found some value in that. And now I'm happy to reflect on any questions that we might have from the group presented today.
As we give Drew a chance just to grab a sip of water and collect himself after that great presentation. We're going to turn it over to your part, really spending the next 30 minutes diving into the questions that are on your mind. And we've already received a number of topics or questions that are important to you. So we're going to jump right in and start tackling those. Drew, a number of folks have asked questions about test optional schools, Holy Cross being one of them, standardized test optional schools. So what part do standardized test scores play in the admissions process or in the application process for schools that are test optional?
That's a great question. The confusing part about test optional is that there are lots of colleges flying the test optional flag these days. Unfortunately, test optional can mean lots of different things at each individual college. So I encourage families, anytime they hear an admissions representative from a college say that their school is test optional, your first question should be, what does that mean here at this school? At Holy Cross, it means exactly what you think it would mean. It actually means it's up for the student to decide whether or not they should submit standardized testing as a part of their application. We found that a majority of our conversation and our deliberations in our admissions committee focuses on this work that the student has done in the classroom over the course of 4 years. We felt like standardized testing can complement our review process, but it's certainly not a vital part of our conversation. And so we chose to make it optional for students to submit this as part of the application. A little over half of our students will submit standardized testing. The acceptance rate is the same for both groups of students, those who choose to submit scores and those who choose to withhold their scores. Students often ask if they don't send their scores, well, we think they did poorly. The truth is, we don't think about things we don't see. There's a lot of content in any student's application, and we focus on what we see. We don't spend any time talking about information that we don't see, so that if the student decides not to submit their standardized testing, we simply don't talk about it. Usually the best person to advise a student on whether or not they should submit their standardized test scores to a test optional school is going to be their guidance counselor. Their counselor should usually have a good grasp over the scores that are within range at any particular college or university. It's worth knowing, though, that other schools who have gone test optional, some of them might require an additional documentation from a student who chooses not to submit standardized test scores. Some schools require an essay in lieu of standardized testing. Other schools require an interview in lieu of standardized testing. And it's also worth understanding that while some test optional schools aren't going to use standardized testing as a big part of their application, it's worth knowing that each school has different standards and expectations for what strong standardized testing might be. One particular applicant might see that their scores would be a strength in their application at one test optional school, and at a different test optional school, they might see that their testing would not be a strength based on the profile of applicants at each individual college. So it is a complicated part of the admissions process, but it's good to keep the guidance counselor in the loop, and it's good to determine for each applicant when they're applying to college whether or not standardized testing is going to be a strength in their application. And if not, then they really need to be considering test optional schools. If testing will be a strength in their application, then it's still fine to consider test optional schools. Sending strong scores can really help complement an otherwise strong application.
Drew, to go back to your analogy of the skeleton, kind of comparing different transcripts, we've heard from a number of folks participating today asking about high schools that weigh versus who have weighted GPAs versus unweighted GPAs. And the question is, how do you evaluate kind of weighted versus unweighted GPAs when you're reviewing thousands of applications?
Yeah, it's just about the most important thing that we do. That's the truth. There's an important document that comes as a part of every application. It's sent by the guidance staff at every high school, and it's called the high school profile. Admissions professionals consider it to be the most important document in any file. It really is, and very often parents and students have never even seen the high school profile from their high school. It is essentially all the information that any admissions professional would want to know about a particular high school. It will include information about grading. It will include information about the course weights. It will include information about courses available, levels of courses, grade distribution profiles, where students enroll, makeup of the community. It is essentially any piece of information that an admissions professional would want to know to help them understand a transcript. Now, when it comes to GPAs, there's two kinds of colleges out there, two kinds of admissions office. There's one admissions office which is going to take the student's GPA, throw it away, go through the transcript, and compute their own GPA based on grades in courses that they consider important, and adding weight or not adding weight based upon that institution's policy. There's another group of schools that won't consider the student's GPA, but instead will do a very close inspection of the student's transcript, course levels, and grades earned. Either way, whatever the number is, whatever the GPA is that a student knows to be true at their high school, colleges are going to do a much deeper investigation into their academic worth, understanding both course levels and GPAs, whether they're weighted or unweighted, and they're going to add value where they see value, whether it is looking at a student's unleveled courses or adding weight based on the strength of the curriculum. That being said, everyone in the admissions world understands that the higher level courses provide great preparation for a student when they're preparing to go away to college. It is the closest thing that we can see to the courses that we offer. The higher the level the courses are at the high school level. And finally, it's worth understanding that students who are in rigorous environments, we hope that they will choose rigorous coursework, maybe perhaps even the most rigorous coursework in which they can be successful. Setting students up for failure by pursuing too many high-level courses is a bad move, and coasting through high school with excellent grades without ever pursuing elevated coursework is a mistake as well. So finding that balance between a rigorous curriculum in which the student can be successful, that's a fine balance, and it's a delicate balance. And generally speaking, the guidance counselor at the high school is the best person to advise. They have touch points with the high school curriculum, with the students' strengths and skills, and also with colleges and universities and their admissions offices and their policies. The guidance counselor is in the middle of that triangle, and typically they're the best to advise on course level each year for the student.
Drew, a lot of questions about legacy applications. So how important is having a mom or a mom and a dad who are, in this case, graduates of Holy Cross? How important is that in the application process?
Well, at Holy Cross, it's certainly something that that we note in the file. That's something that we can download automatically from the student's application. That also gets a student into a separate pile that that eventually ends up on my desk, though there's no real piles anymore. It's all online. And it's a special case that we consider, and we want to give the sons and daughters of our alumni a little special consideration in our committee process. So, but we read that application the same way we read any other application. We present the children of alumni to our committee early on in our committee schedule, and we give them a little extra consideration. Now, it's certainly not important than the academic work that the student presents, and it's certainly not more important than recommendations and essays and interviews. It's not more important than the meat of the application. But what it does help us to do is to understand perhaps why the applicant might be interested in Holy Cross, and it allows us to give pause and understand that because of the special connection that Holy Cross alumni have to the college, that we want to give a little special consideration to their sons and daughters when they choose to apply to Holy Cross.
Drew, several questions about the quality of high school. So you said, and it's true, that high school is important, but how important is the actual high school, and how familiar are colleges with the quality of each high school that applicants are coming from?
Yeah, that's actually perhaps the most challenging part of college admissions each year, because not only are colleges receiving more applications each year, but they're receiving applications from more high schools each year. So every year it's imperative that each college not only gets a really firm grasp over their applications, but the high schools from which these applications are coming from. So because to understand a transcript, you have to understand the setting. You have to understand the high school, the courses available, and the grading structure of that school. So we don't punish or reward students for the high school that they attend, but we do hold them accountable for what they've done as it compares to what's been available to them. So with information that comes from that high school profile, we do have a really clear sense over the courses that have been available to them, over how the grading is composed at that particular high school, over requirements, over opportunities, over extracurricular activities, over the makeup of the community. It really is every admissions officer's job to understand clearly that environment in which the student has been studying for 4 years. That's why this is a 12-month job. That's why there's a lot of travel as a part of this job as well. That's why we spend 6, 7, 8 weeks per person in our office in the fall doing outreach, traveling around the world to meet with guidance counselors and students at high schools. That's why we work in May, June, July, and August as well. And a lot of that is spent getting to know high schools and being really familiar with the opportunities available to students at each high school. And then the reality is even when you're reading an application, there are many opportunities that we're going to reach out to schools, reach out to guidance counselors for clarification. We bring every application to a committee of 13 people at Holy Cross, and each of those 13 people wants to be really clear with what they're being presented. Every person of that committee wants to have a really clear understanding of that student's application so that they feel really confident when they vote. And very often most of the questions that we will have are about the student's high school and about not necessarily what they've done, but what they've done as it compares to what's been available to them. So as a reader, it's your job to anticipate those questions. So very often we will reach out to high schools, we will reach out to guidance counselors as a part of our reading process to help clarify the things that we're seeing, to help better understand the student's 4-year experience and the setting over their high school career, so that when that file does come to committee, we not only have a clear idea over what that student has done for 4 years, but we have a clear idea over their high school, the teachers and the curriculum, and who they're studying with on a day-to-day basis. So it is the most important part of our job, and it's the reason why this is a 12-month-a-year profession that grows every single year.
Drew, schools have early action. They have early decision opportunities. Can you talk a little bit about the similarities or differences between early action versus early decision, and the pros and cons of either?
Sure, and just quickly to define a few programs here. Early Action is a very popular application program these days. It's not an application that Holy Cross offers, but it is very, very popular amongst a lot of our peer schools right now. And what Early Action means is that the student applies under an earlier deadline. November 1st and November 15th are very popular early action deadlines. So they're applying to meet an earlier deadline, and they also will have an earlier notification. So a lot of these schools will notify students of their decision much earlier than their regular notification deadline. So some schools that have a November 1st deadline, some of them are notifying before Christmas the students of their decisions. So the benefit to the student is that they apply earlier and they find out earlier. And under the early action program, there's no binding commitment made by the student. So it is an easy application that the student can submit, whereby they can apply early, find out early, but not be bound to that school. And if they're admitted, they have until May 1st to decide whether or not they want to enroll at that particular school. That is not an application that we offer at Holy Cross. At Holy Cross, we offer the binding application called Early Decision. This is also popular, particularly amongst a lot of small schools. And under the Early Decision application, if a student submits an Early Decision application, they have committed to enroll at that college if they're admitted. So you can only apply to have one application active at an Early Decision school. They typically have an earlier deadline. At Holy Cross, our Early Decision deadline is December 15th, as compared to our regular decision deadline of January 15th. And we have an earlier notification. Typically, we're notifying students of the decision on their early decision application in December and January. The benefits to early decision are clear. There's an earlier deadline, earlier notification, and finally, you've made it very clear to that school that you are there, that they are your first choice, and that you intend to enroll if admitted. Now, whether or not it's right for a student to apply early action or early decision is a little bit complicated, and it depends upon the particular applicant and the particular college. Now, as you heard me describe some of those early action schools, some of which might have a deadline as early as November 1st or November 15th, in some of those cases, those colleges will not have grades from the senior fall for that particular application because their deadline might be before the first term has finished at a student's high school. So a student that really is on an upward trend academically, they may find that in a particular case that meeting an earlier deadline might be to their disadvantage because that college won't have their first quarter grades. At Holy Cross, our deadline is later for our early application, for our early decision application of December 15th. We actually require fall grades as a part of the early decision application. In fact, at Holy Cross, there's no difference in content between the application for early decision or regular decision. But because so many of these schools have early deadlines for early action that are in fact earlier than first term grades might be available, it really is imperative for the student and the family to research deadlines and policies as it regards to each individual college and their early action or early decision application program. Typically, I'm going to sound like a little bit of a broken record, but typically the guidance counselor is in the best position to advise not only which schools that the student should consider applying to, but also under which application program. Some students may be competitive under certain application programs at a college and not competitive under a different application program, but those sort of policies can vary school by school, year by year. Typically, guidance counselors are in the best position to advise families on those decisions.
Drew, can you talk a little bit about financial aid strategies as part of the application process and how the two kind of play hand in hand?
You know, years ago, the common refrain for high school students was to think about having balance to their list of schools to which they apply. And years ago, balance really only referred to admissibility. You know, students had a reach schools on their list, they had target schools on their list, and they had safety schools on their list. But more and more so these days, as the cost of higher education has increased, families are starting to think not just about admissibility balance to the list, but also about financial balance to the list, making sure that there are some schools that might be much more safety schools as far as cost is concerned and affordability, and some schools that might be a more reach school when it comes to affordability. So understanding the costs associated with higher education is just as important as understanding the admissions criteria. Now, as regards to financial aid, that is a great project for research on behalf of the parents. Keeping your students informed about cost is important as well, but also understanding that the answers about financial aid, affordability, and merit scholarships are really going to vary school to school and year by year. And this is a factor that some guidance counselors may be informed on, but sometimes they're not as informed as families would hope they would be. So that's why I really put this burden upon the families to do this research each year. When you spend the time researching a particular college, researching their academic offerings, researching their admissions criteria, you should spend just as much time researching that school's financial aid policies and merit scholarship opportunities. At some colleges, the financial aid office and the admissions office will be one, and you can direct questions on affordability and admissions to the same office. At Holy Cross, we do it a little bit differently. We have completely separate offices. Financial aid and admissions are in two different buildings, two completely different staffs, and your questions about each need to be directed individually to each office. If you called the admissions office at Holy Cross and asked about financial aid, all we would be able to relate to you is the documents that we require
We seem to have lost Drew's audio, so please be patient as we try to get him back online. I apologize for that. We'll going to try to get Drew back online right now.
Can people hear me now?
Drew, you're on loud and clear. We can hear you.
Okay, great. I can hear you now too. So my audio cut out there for a second, but I just had finished an answer about financial aid.
Okay, excellent. Drew, we have a number of questions about student athletes and kind of the admissions process for prospective students who are interested in pursuing athletics in college. Can you talk a little bit about that and maybe even how the Holy Cross process is for potential student athletes?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's a great topic, and it's certainly rife with lots of rumors and speculation. The reality is that particularly at Holy Cross and other of our peer schools, the most important decision for us is that each of the students that we admit and enroll is going to be academically competitive in our classroom at Holy Cross. So that's when we're considering a possible student athlete, the first thing we're considered with is how are they going to compete in the Holy Cross classroom. Typically how it works at Holy Cross is that we provide each of our coaches, each of our head coaches, each of our athletic programs with a liaison in the admissions office. And that coach can bring academic information to their liaison and have an early academic read done for any student that they might be interested in recruiting athletically. So when they see an athletic match, their next step is really to find out whether or not there's an academic match as well. And at Holy Cross, we need both of those pieces to fit together. So we start that conversation pretty early on with our coaches. And our coaches know the specific academic information that we need to give them feedback on a possible recruit. And we keep that dialogue going 12 months a year, really. I hear from coaches almost every single day of the calendar year because what they're really interested in finding is great athletes who are great students as well, who would also be a great match for Holy Cross and vice versa. So we, at some sports, that conversation can begin really most often in earnest during the student's junior year. Sometimes informally can begin slightly before that, but what we really look for is the same things we would look for in the non-athlete applicant. We look for a student who's doing the best with what's available to them in high school, pursuing a demanding curriculum, performing well within that curriculum. And I will say the last piece that makes it a little bit different is that when we look at a recruited student athlete as a part of the early read process for a coach, we do require standardized testing. Now that seems a little strange at a school that's test optional. But the reality is that while Holy Cross is test optional, the NCAA is not, nor is the Patriot League. So when we do any early read for a coach, for any of the recruited student athletes, we do require standardized testing because we have to submit that information to the NCAA and to the Patriot League as part of how we share our academic information on all of our incoming recruits. So, I do a lot of athletic workshops for high school students, and the thing I really try to impress upon them is the harder you work in the classroom as a student, the more options you will have as a recruited student athlete.
Drew, does Holy Cross or other selective schools for that matter know or really care about what other schools applicants are applying to?
Yeah, that's one of those great urban legends that we hear so often. We do not know where students have applied, and we don't really care. So often, I think students are afraid to offer that information, And I often tell students, you don't need to be afraid to offer up that information, because the reality is I don't care, nor does our admissions committee care. We look at the application that's in front of us. We determine whether or not they would be a good fit for Holy Cross, using academics as our primary tool, and whether the student has applied to one other school or 10 other schools, and which those schools are. We don't really care. We're only concerned about how that student might be a fit at Holy Cross.
Excellent. You talked about kind of the value that admissions counselors place, at least Holy Cross counselors place on, say, the junior year, fall of a senior year. Several folks who are participating tonight have sons or daughters who are even earlier in the process than that. Maybe a freshman, sophomore in high school, maybe not even in high school yet. From your perspective, what's the best timing for prospective students to start engaging with colleges? Is it ever too early to start a process leading toward eventual application?
Yeah, so I conduct, a couple hundred interviews every year, and each of those conversations is different. But I will say that there's probably 2 or 3 questions that I ask each student that I interview. One of the questions that I ask is, to each student, I say, if you were to do this process all over again, this college search process, if you were to do it all over again, is there anything you do differently? Over 13 years of interviewing in the admissions office at Holy Cross, I've received just about only one answer to that question. Essentially, every student says, I wish I had started earlier. The reality is that we think that introducing the idea of college to high school students early in their career will distract them, or that it's putting too much pressure on them. But the truth is, I think it can be a great motivating factor. It can help them understand what some of their goals are in high school. And the truth is that there is a lot of time spent in high school as a part of activities and student clubs and organizations and outside of the classroom commitments that it can make it really difficult to find time to visit colleges, especially when that search process is done just during the student's senior year. The earlier students start to visit college, the more they learn about college and the more they learn about themselves. So I think informal visits to colleges, on the way to grandma's house for Thanksgiving, it's fine to get off exit 11 and take a walk around Mount St. James or any other college that might be on the way to grandma's house. Introducing the idea of college, about what size feel like, and about what students are working towards in high school, I think can be a great motivating factor and great to provide perspective for them as they start to learn about college through the high school years.
Well, probably on that note, it'd be a great question to end with. We're at time. It's 8 o'clock here in Worcester, and I just wanted to thank you for sharing your time and knowledge with us tonight, Drew, and for all of you who participated. We hope to continue offering more of these alumni webinars in the future. Stay tuned for upcoming notices about future dates and topics. We're going to be sending out a survey in relation to today's topic, so please let us know your thoughts. And I apologize again for that audio cutout, but I don't think it impacted our discussion too much. So Drew, thank you for making the time. For all of you, thank you for joining us. And stay tuned for more of these alumni webinars in the future. Thank you all.